Yeah, so my name's Kevin Dill. This is Nathan Reifsteck. Like you said, we have a lot of traditional influence. We also have a lot of modern influence. We're going to kind of go through how we view traditional American rudimental drumming, and then kind of how we use that in the military. So, also, if you want to put earplugs in or cover your ears, you will not be offended. Let's play something for you first. So this is one of the first drum solos written by someone in the Old Guard, specifically for the Old Guard to play. It's called Drums on the Potomac. Where we're stationed in Fort Myer, Virginia, is right across the Potomac River from D.C., right? So that's where the name comes from. And this was written early 1960s, so not super traditional, but also not super modern, okay? And I promise it's way cooler than the whole drum line. So you can tell that that whole solo is just rudiment after rudiment after rudiment. When we think about rudimental drumming, we try to avoid writing just like drum beatings or patterns. You know, like you could play da 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 just single stroke, right? But we try to incorporate paradiddles, puttidas to achieve the same sound, the same pattern, and really, when you dive into the genealogy of rudimental drumming, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but we can trace it back to 12th century, like 1300s Switzerland, right? The Swiss mercenaries were hired out by all the different European armies to fight, sometimes against each other. You know, the French would hire Swiss mercenaries, and the Germans would hire Swiss mercenaries, and they would fight each other. But they were exceptional at communicating on the battlefield because they had snare drummers and fifers, right, attached to their units. So whenever the commander wanted to issue a battlefield command, or even a command when they're in garrison, not in battle, he would find his one fifer and one drummer and say, hey, sound retreat, or sound assembly. I want everybody to get together. So they were super vital to just good order and discipline within the army. So all the countries' armies that hired the Swiss mercenaries were like, that's a good idea. We're going to start doing that, right? So everybody started to get their fifers and drummers, and they kind of learned in that Swiss style. And eventually that made its way to Great Britain, made its way over to America, and that's kind of the seed that was planted for American rudimental drumming. It's coming all the way from the Swiss. If you go to Switzerland, or you watch any videos, if you can, you know, YouTube search in Swiss Deutsch, which is pretty hard to do. You'll see that they to this day have a really vibrant fife and drum tradition. The same way you would be like a teenager in middle America and you start like a garage band, they have fife and drum corps, right? They don't have bass drums. It's true to where it was, just a snare drum and a fifer back in the day. So it's super interesting to go over there and see how, where this all came from. Okay, any questions about that? I'm gonna stop a lot for questions.
Wasn't there an event that just happened in Switzerland?
Oh yeah, so it's the Swiss version of like Carnival. It's called Fastnacht. It's 4 days of drinking and fifing and drumming, and they wear like super scary masks. I don't know, I can't tell you. I forget the reason for wearing the masks, but as with any traditional European holiday, it's kind of creepy. But you'll have groups of 100 people. 50 fifers, 50 snare drummers. Some of the big, they call them cliques. It's kind of like their fife and drum corps, their groups. They'll all have like themed outfits, usually something a little bit obscene or like poking at modern issues or cultural issues. And they'll just march around for 4 days. They don't sleep. They just march from bar to bar. It's a pretty crazy time. I haven't been myself, but I have some friends who've done it, and they seem to enjoy themselves quite a bit. But yeah, it all comes from Switzerland. So once it came over here, the American military continued the tradition. Every major conflict leading up to World War I, fifes and drums were used as communication, either in camp or in garrison or literally on the battlefield, issuing commands. That stopped right around the time when the radio was invented. They didn't need us anymore. They had radios. But yeah, and you can still see remnants of that today. When you go into a military post, you can hear reveille to wake the troops up. You'll hear bugle calls to, it's projected over like loudspeakers because the bases are massive now. But that tradition still holds. So, do you want to talk about coming out of military service and kind of going into like a folk music tradition?
Yeah, coming out of, like you said, out of military service towards more of a folk tradition. A lot of the musicians that had played drums in the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, and these 1800s wars came back to their communities and they wanted to keep playing and keep doing their thing. So they started just meeting up and playing together in their communities. And they started teaching the next generation kind of what they did in the military, their fife and drum style. And that would grow into these community bands or into these community fife and drum corps. So that's kind of where, right, like the civilian fife and drum corps started in the late 1800s, early 1900s in America, mainly in the Northeast. And then bass drumming, fife and drum bass drumming, like you see me doing today, kind of came out of that style. Really in military bands, on the battlefield, bass wouldn't have existed at all. You would just have a snare and a fife. The treble can cut through gunfire and loud noise. You're not going to hear a bass drum on a battlefield. But you would have them in bands for troop entertainment, maybe on parade, but they'd be playing something very simple, one mallet, sideways bass drum, just kind of quarter notes sort of thing. But they brought those bass drums back to these bands, and like all drummers, when you get in a group, you want to start competing and seeing who's the fastest and who's the best. So that kind of spawned fife and drum competitions, which I'll let him talk about more in a second, but it also spawned bass competition that was part of that, and that's where you see the bass drummers starting to use two mallets, starting to play with rudiments, just like the snare drummers, and a lot of the flair or the swings you see me doing. That is for style points, I would assume back in the day, but now it's almost, it's second nature for any bass drummer in just about any fife and drum corps across the country. It's so ingrained in how we play now, and it's an homage back to how they started about 100 years ago playing this style of bass drumming.
Yeah, for sure. And so we found records of fife and drum competitions being held as early as like the 1890s. So it wasn't even the 20th century yet. It may have been happening before that, but I've heard of and seen evidence of them doing it in the 1890s. And one of the things they would do is they would play down their rudiments, right? They would have solos, and then the judge would ask for 10 rudiments. And you probably heard in that solo, we're doing some weird stuff with the time and the tempo, right? a lot of that, there's several theories to that, but a lot of that comes from simply how you learn the rudiment in the first place. We had a group come over, sorry, tangent. We had a group come over and visit us in DC. They're the Dutch Royal Marines from the Netherlands. And they actually still have like the paper documents from like the 1600s saying, all right, to learn this rudiment, the snare drummer will then open his sticks up and pick them up over his head and begin, for each rudiment, like, this is a starting position for this rudiment, this is the starting position for this rudiment. So we know that before they had metronomes, before they had any etude books or anything, this was how they would learn the rudiments. And we call it nowadays just a rudiment breakdown, which is essentially starting slow, speeding up, and then slowing back down, hopefully symmetrically, right? The time it takes you to speed up, the same time it takes you to slow down. So I'll demonstrate that now. I'm just gonna break down the long roll, or just an open double stroke roll. You can kind of see how that style has been ingrained just by how you learn the rudiments. So here we go. My sticks are having a little bit of a romance today. Cool, so you can see that was just for the open roll, but you could do that for the 7-stroke roll, That kind of idea, you do that for all your rudiments. So you can see that it takes a lot of time to move your hands up and down, especially in between the rudiments. So that's one of the main reasons why there is that little bit of a gap or a breath in between the rudiments. Is the way these people learned their rudiments back in the day was you played 7 strokes and then you lifted your hands back up, right? And that creates that extra space. It also helps us kind of wind up for these rudiments, especially the louder ones. It's a lot of inertia we have to generate, so coming up from a higher stick height helps us do that. They have the hard part. They have to hit the last note of all of our rolls with all of our weirdness going on. So we'll show you a quick exercise we use in the old guards called Ancient Roll. Cool name, right? And this is just for us to kind of sync things up, not only the notes we're playing, but the movement in between the notes. You'll see me doing some preparatory movements in between the rolls and some of these, like stick manuals, things that we would commonly use. The bass drummer's job is to be the most active listener in the room and end right when we're ending, right? Regardless of how silly we get with it. Just one time through, ancient roll. Some of the rolls are a little bit more straightforward, like those 11 strokes. Down, around. Those are pretty much in time, but a lot of the 15s, the 7s, even the 10s, we kind of swing those. Down. Those rudiments we kind of swing a little bit. I'm going to open it up for questions. Yes.
Why do you tape your sticks?
These are not taped, they're painted.
Oh.
But that's just so people can see what we're doing.
Okay.
You know, it might not be. I have whiteboards behind me, and I'm wearing a white shirt. But normally, in our red colonial uniforms that we normally perform in, it just helps people see all the non-traditional cool stuff we're doing. Yes.
So if you're not used to swinging the rolls, how do you start that process of like getting used to the feel?
Rudiment breakdowns, right? Because there is no meter. You're just gradually speeding up and gradually slowing down. And we try to kind of shift your focus to like the expression of the rudiment versus the timing, if that makes any sense. So you probably heard a lot of the rolls have a little bit of a, I wouldn't say a crescendo, but it's more, I'm phrasing to that last note. Same thing with a lot of our other rudiments like Rudiment cues, right? It's da 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 da. It's a bum, it's a bum, it's a bum. So focusing focusing on the expression of the rudiment more than like the timing, I would say, is what I had to do, and then just a ton of listening, finding recordings. Luckily, I've been able to go up to New England and do a lot of like fife and drum musters and parades to hear some of the more traditional groups. Right, it's still an active tradition up there. There are corps like Stony Creek Fife and Drum Corps. They've been active since like 1886 or something. Like just continuously playing and doing parades. So they are really good examples of like that pure like Connecticut fife and drum tradition. So going up and being able to hear them in person is an experience. And they're all really cool guys too.
The style helps as well. I mean, he's picking up his stick for a lot of the initiation of these, the top bar, whatever, for these rolls. So if you match that when you're watching, just as much as you're listening, you're watching as well, and that'll help you enter and end together.
Yeah, great question. Any questions? Yes.
I do. Do some of the bass drum visual things have specific terminology?
It depends who you ask. I'm sure someone on in the East Coast might say yes, this is exactly what it's called. Because maybe they know what it was called when it was founded 150 years ago. We have our own terminology for it, and we've got little symbols that we draw in the music. There's 10 snare drummers and 7 bass drummers in our group, so the music has to be extremely standardized. We are very nitpicky with how we write. We try and write most of the expression and most of the phrasing of our rudiments into the music. And then same thing with the visuals. They're very intentional. We even have to have discussions agreeing on like, well, okay, we're going to do this visual, but do you spin on one or are you locking on one? Things like that, because when you're playing across a group, we want it to be exact. So we have our own terms, overhead right, double overhead, tag, post, half. I don't know why this one's called a half. That's a full term.
It goes all the way around.
But that's what we call it.
Dumb question.
And we'll write that in the music. You'll see a little half mark, or you'll see a little arrow doing this, and that means do this. But yeah, it's definitely more standardized in our group. Other groups might not do as many different kinds of visuals that we do. But like I was saying earlier, the way of playing fife and drum, bass drum, I mean, a standard snare part, just 7 flam, 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 7 flam, 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 flam. Well, the bass drummer's not going to go right, left, right, left, right, left, right. We're not going to match that sticking. It's going to be right, right, left, left, right, right, left. You see a lot of moving the sticking of the bass drumming specifically so that your arm, the bigger breath or the bigger count, is doing a quarter note no matter what your hands are doing. And that allows for, just across the board, if that's what the music is, without telling anyone at like a fife and drum muster, everyone's doing this. That's just what you do. That's how you learn the rudiment. That's how you learn that style. So we try and honor that anytime we maybe have passages like that, because we want to honor the tradition, what they're doing in the Northeast. But then we also have visuals that are special to us that no one else does, that we use specifically for subdividing timing. So a lot of the times we'll have 3 counts of rest, and if there's 3 counts of rest, you can almost bet we're going to go boom, 2, 3, 4. It's just our thing. Or 1 count of rest, it's going to be a half. It's just, even if it's not written in yet, if it's new music, we're all playing together, we'll just be like, oh look, and everyone just does the same thing. Start doing this, start doing that. So it's writing the visuals is pretty easy, and then you'll go back through and then I'm gonna put a weird one here for no reason. Kind of spice it up a little bit.
Make everyone mad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a ton of tradition in this. What we do at the Old Guard, we try to incorporate as much as that as possible. But we are an active duty military band that has to do modern day active duty military band things. So I'll just give an example. I'll play a traditional 6/8 called Fancy 6/8 by J. Burns Moore. And it's traditionally played with 7s and 15s, right? And you'll hear that, you hear the time change, right? I promise it's written in 6/8. I'll just play that for you now, and then I'll kind of show you how we have to interpret it when we're marching troops at the Old Guard. So here's Fancy 6/8. That would be kind of difficult to march to, right? So what we do, you want to join me? Is in a ceremony, one of the particular movements we do is called Officer NCO Exchange. And it's cued by the bass drummers, right? The bugles will play the call, the actual call of Officer NCO Exchange. And then the bass drummer will cue all the troops for when they're going to start marching. And you'll see that to play it more metronomically in time, I convert the 7s to 5 strokes, the 15s to 13 strokes, and we also alternate the sticking, right? So let's try that.
And I just play quarter notes, so I'm not confused.
Which is, again, not the traditional bass drum part for that, so this is an adaptation.
On the cue.
Drum major would give a cut there. Yeah. So you can see, way easier for troops to march to. Whether we realize it or not, just modern day music is way more in time than any of the music in the 17th, 18th centuries would have been. So they can tell, even if they're not musicians, they can tell, like, oh, that's not right. That's just not. So, we do that just to be as accurate as possible. Okay? Any questions about that? That's just one of the things we do. That particular drum beating, every Monday, we'll send a snare drummer and a bass drummer out either to our ceremonial hall or on our parade field on post, and we'll just play that for like 2-3 hours. And the troops will just march, practice marching to it, practice their drill and ceremony. We have that beating. We also have another super straightforward beating for marching our color guard around. It just sounds like this. That's just some of the stuff we do as a pseudo field music group. Like, we're not giving commands on the battlefield anymore, but we are marching troops around and supporting their ceremonial training. Cool. Any questions about any of that? Yes.
Could you maybe talk about your rudimental bass technique?
Yeah.
I've noticed that a lot of, especially those New England guys, play like that, but I've never understood why.
Yeah, so who's bass drum in a marching band here? Anybody? Right, so half you. So you know, what's some differences about this drum than a marching bass drum?
Sits a bit lower, it looks like.
Sits a bit lower, so that's huge, right? Also, traditionally, this would have calf on it, wouldn't have plastic. He talked about before, we're a military group, we have to play at all hours of every day, right? And we play a lot. We can't, first of all, calfskin's like a lot more expensive than this Evans head that I stripped the logo off of, right? So, and second, we could find ourselves playing in rain or playing for hours a day, and we would burn through those calfskins. That's why, if you're wondering why there's plastic on here and Kevlar on there, that's why we're doing that. But yes, the drum sits lower. So to get more sound out of the bass, especially if it had calfskin on it, you have to have a bigger stroke pattern. This sort of from the elbow technique that you'll see in modern bass drumming. I mean, you can still get sound out of it, but one, you're not gonna be, I mean, you'd have to drop your hand. That's weird. Usually it's up here, right? I bounced around on a bass line at University of Missouri. I played 5, then I played 1, then I played 7. Right, so I've been all around the line, so I know moving around, but this is lower than any of them. And also the mallets, right? That's different. It's shaped to the hand more. It's got this little divot here in the back for the pinky, and there's no felt on here. This is a more teardrop shaped head. There's also perfectly circle ones or spherical ones, right? Just kind of depends on what you want. There's some that are longer, some that are shorter. This is what we're using right now. This is a Cooperman Quahog. We all kind of agreed on this is what we want to use for the time being. But you'll see my grip. This is also different, right? I'm not doing this. My fulcrum is not my thumb and my pointer finger like you might have in traditional bass drumming, or modern bass drumming, right? My fulcrum is my pinky and my ring finger. So a lot of times, especially when I'm just messing around, or maybe not so much in uniform, but when I'm playing just to play, my fingers might not even be on the mallet. I might just be, you'll see them come all the way off the stick, because I don't need them. And it lets the mallet resonate, lets the drum resonate more, so we pull it off. But what I'm doing is I'm leading my entire stroke from the bottom of my hand, from the bottom of the mallet. So as opposed to coming, leading with the bead and coming out, I'm coming out with the bottom of the hand, arcing a pattern all the way up, all the way in, and then whipping, right? Whip stroke, like molar, right? The same thing you'll see them doing up here, that molar stroke. I'm doing the same thing, but I'm doing it sideways. So, and you need that baseball bat grip so you can hang on to the mallet. That's the whole reason for that. I mean, you could do this, but you're gonna want to do this.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
It helps them generate a lot of power. Helps us generate a lot of power. Like I do use these fingers, I promise. But it's only for certain things, right? This is really my fulcrum. So like
Middle two?
yeah, middle two. I mean, depends. I'll use the pinky. If I'm playing like a really fast like roll passage, I'll add a little bit of pressure up front. But when you have infantrymen 100 yards that way and you're marching them around, they have to be able to hear you. So yeah. Cool. Were you able to print out?
Yeah, I've got a few. I also emailed you guys, so if you want to pull out your iPads or phones, I got 5 extra copies here.
Actually, you know what? Let's have these guys play. And
Okay.
have time at the end.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's a better.
Mm-hmm. I have one more question.
Yeah.
Who are some rudimental bass drumming legends that have either passed or might be alive today for some of these folks to check out to sort of be inspired?
The guy in the old guard, Nathan Reifsteck, he's pretty good. Well, I think the one that comes to mind is pretty obvious is Nick Antonaccio. He modeled a lot of this style. He was a championship bass drummer for a long time. He taught former group leader of the old guard drumline, Mark Riley. So he set a lot of that precedent. He passed away a few years ago. Dominic Cuccio writes a ton of bass solos. He was in the Hellcats, right? So he plays with the Corps up on the East Coast. He's still very much in the tradition, very much at all the musters. He writes excellent music, and he loves to talk. So I mean, you can look him up, you can look up his works, but you also, if you ever go out there, and he'll talk to you about it and he'll explain anything that's going on. Those are the two that I focused on. Nick Antonaccio stuff was printed in the company books. Company of Fifers and Drummers have books like standardized music. I grew up in a fife and drum corps in St. Louis, so I grew up looking at those parts, not really knowing who the guy was. And then when I auditioned for the old guard, I played a Dominic Cuccio bass solo to get my part, my spot.
Yeah. There's tons of great drummers. One that's still with us is Donald Mason. Awesome drummer, plays with the Connecticut Patriots. You may have met his sons, Brendan, Colin, or Peter Mason, right? They're super active. They do a lot of teaching, a lot of traveling. And then there were two brothers from Massachusetts, the McGowan brothers, that also helped pioneer a lot of this sort of overhead visual stuff. If you ever see a video of them, they would wear their bass drum literally like down here. Their arms were just straight, and they would just be swinging away. And they were two brothers, some of the best bass drummers I've ever seen. But yeah, that's a good question.
Cool.
Awesome question. All right. Let's hear
Which
some
one of you
drumming.
guys wants to go first?
Let's hear some drumming.
Alright. Playing Gladstone Cadets, so everybody knows. Very cool. Yeah, so Pratt music is super interesting because John Pratt actually spent a lot of time, he's based in New York as a Hellcat, right? So he wasn't that far from a lot of the actual traditional musters. So he would go there, and I can, on a lot of this stuff now that I've been in the old guard and I've been exposed to some of that more traditional stuff, I can see how he wrote down what he thought he heard, He did a really good job of actually standardizing a lot of it, right? Because a lot of the fife and drum style is just, hey, why does this happen? We don't know. That's just how we play it. So he does a really good job actually of sort of he would watch people and then write stuff down. And being at the Hellcats is another group that does actual field music, right? They wake the troops up with a drum call and a bugle call in the morning. They march the cadets around. So a lot of the 7-stroke rolls, right? You guys are you've seen Pratt sheet music before, right? 7-stroke rolls are with the 16th note, dotted 8th note tied, da digga 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 da, as opposed to da ra, right? That just helps march the cadets, right? Keep everything in time. Also, maybe explains that really open 7-stroke roll that he was hearing at some of these traditional events. He was probably like, well, it has to be this. It can't be da, 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 writing it down. So yeah, a lot of this stuff is, you did an awesome job with the rolls, right? If you can tell that when we play rolls, it's not exactly, we're not playing them down here tap height, right? They're just kind of beefy, right? Especially with a larger drum like this, just getting it to speak. So I like your preparatory movements on the rolls. That was awesome. I'm gonna move your hands around a little bit though. Okay, so grab your sticks. So oftentimes in competition, you don't have to play like this, but this is the kind of the way we think about it, and it's a lot of this stuff is actually written down in the Les Parks method book. I don't think it's in print anymore, but I have a copy. I can send it to you guys. But it talks about, even though
He has traditional grip, the drum is off to one side, you're still kind of pursuing that symmetry in how you look, so. Just do this. Face directly forward, and move your hands. So you all sitting like right in front of him, like just fake like you're playing. You can see more of his right stick this way, right? Than you can if it was like this. Right? So the judges would want to see the sticks symmetrically. Right? As soon as I do this with my right hand, you're seeing way more of my left stick than my right stick, just from the perspective. Right? Another thing is, as soon as you drop your hand down and turn it out, you get a better playing angle on the head. Right? They are tall hoops, but you do want to try to get as flat to the head as possible. Right? So kind of dropping that hand down and kicking it out away from your hip will generally help that. If you play like this for any length of time, you'll start doing this, getting that back fulcrum going. It just makes more sense. You may have any questions about that? Left hand looks good. That's exactly where I would put it. Yeah. And this kind of goes back to that traditional Swiss drumming. They would have their drums like all the way down, all the way over. Right arm is fully extended. That is their playing position, right? And they will pick that hand up here and slam that drum, right? It's pretty ridiculous, right? So all their stuff, and they're very well known for being extremely loud and extremely quiet, okay? So just kind of mess around with that, you know. The drum is going to do what the drum is going to do. This might be one instance where you do have to kind of move yourself around the instrument versus getting the instrument set up around you, just in the nature of the beast. Yeah. One last thing, and then I'll turn it over to you if you have anything after this. Doing like a preparatory like stick manual, something like that, is something that Dom does quite a bit in his playing, right? It's really helpful when you're preparing for any like ornamented note, like you have space before like a flamacue or something. Is that right? Just getting that proper primary note and grace note relationship, and you can just chill there for a whole beat, and then drop that flam in, right? It just helps you fill up that time, right? You can do that filling in the rest with that movement, but it also just kind of sets you up like once you do that, you don't have to worry about it anymore. You're not going to pop that flam. If you're starting from here, but it's going to be a good flam, right? You do the left hand, any of your drag rudiments. So let me try to find, yeah, that's a good spot right there on the top of the page. Ziggity bump, jump, 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 to jump, jump, you're gonna get jump. You know. Yeah, so coming off that, do an upstroke off that grace note, ziggity bump, jump, jump, you go. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Right? Do those last two flams. Bra, bra. Yeah. Sexy flams. Right? So, and that, you know, that's another sort of result of practicing your rudiments in that specific way. So, you know, I started the long roll up here, right? Because it's double strokes, so 2 strokes. Boom, boom. Right? The flam, you start here. Bra. Bra. You have all that time where you're just posted up like this. Bra. In between each iteration, right? So just getting that relationship and letting that space be where your sticks aren't here, right? Being comfortable with your sticks, you know, in that preparatory position will go a long way. Cool. That's all I got. You got anything?
Yeah, just a few very nitpicky things. I'm the nitpicker, so. Just in playing rudimental drumming when you've got a lot of rudiments on the page, right? Just being very comfortable with what you have, right? Just understanding everything that's on here. You had single 7s, 5-stroke rolls, flamacues, right? Flams, 15s, radimacues. And I could hear which rudiments were more comfortable than the other ones. So just knowing yourself and knowing if I'm going to play a piece, what do I need to practice the most? To me, I would think it might be the radimacue. So I was hearing what we would call telegraphing that rudiment, right? When every time you were leading into a radimacue, I could hear the dynamic or the timing slip a little bit because you were having to go into it. So it's just understanding that, recording yourself and listening back, and then finding those spots and practicing those rudiments exactly like we've been talking about all day, right? And that's going to get that comfortability. I really liked the dynamic contrast throughout the entire piece. He does a pretty good job of annotating a lot of it, right? So since that's good, the next step of that would be exploring the dynamic within the dynamic, or exploring the phrasing of the rudiments within the crescendo, right? So yeah, you can play this long crescendo passage of paradiddles and double paradiddles and whatever else it is, if you want. That's fine. That's what you did. It sounded good. But now maybe challenge yourself a little bit, or if you want to play it differently, you could phrase each of those rudiments within that crescendo. You explore, do this kind of with your volume if you want. I'm not saying you have to, but that's something that we do a lot. We phrase every single rudiment that we play. Now we do it almost to a fault and like annotate it exactly in our music. Now that's a huge drive. So now it's almost to the point where it's annoying at this point. But that's just something you can do in your own music. You can write it in, or just decide like, what do I want to do? Like chuck it, get that. Now it's the intro of the piece, right? So maybe you do want to just play straight across, but maybe there's a slight crescendo within that mezzo forte dynamic to the and of two, right? Even if it's small, I'm not saying change dynamics necessarily, but there's room to move within each dynamic. Just exploring that a little bit.
Yes, sir.
Really good job.
Thank you.
All right.
Jake, didn't Dom write this one?
Yes, he
Yeah,
did. Yeah,
I was
I'm
gonna
playing the Hellcats by Don Cuccio.
How many of y'all like teach or like run an ensemble or anything like that? Yeah. So I mean, we kind of have it easy. We have 2 instrument groups, and those are the only instrument groups we'll ever have: snare drum and bass drum. But believe it or not, we very rarely get all of the drummers in the same room to rehearse at one time. So for us, it is critical to have as much detail on the page and make sure that everyone understands the notation system. We write in the Swiss style. If you've seen the Connecticut halftime music, right hand above the line, left hand below the line. But we have definitions. Like I've literally made like graphs talking about the relationship of like, here's an unaccented note. Here's a note with a tenuto on it. Here's a note with an accent. Here's a note with a marcato. Here's a note with an up bow. And like written out prose definitions of each of those things. We find it super helpful. It'd be hard to do that with like an ensemble with like, 10 different instruments, because each instrument is kind of different. But for those of you who teach, especially if you're struggling for rehearsal time, it is a worthy investment to make sure that the students understand the notation system and it's very clearly laid out so that they can learn it by themselves, and people just show up and, oh, it's exactly how I wanted it to sound, right? You need much less rehearsal time if you are achieving that sort of understanding. Cool.
Cool.
Get him.
So, everything you said, Evan.
Perfect, thank you.
No, seriously, though, so what's something that was said that might benefit you? Just thinking about what you just played.
Definitely thinking about like what you were saying with like telegraphing the rudiments. Like I feel that a lot of my hands of, specifically a lot of the fast like sixes like this, like that. I feel like I slow those down, or like the hands like sound like that sometimes. That's like the biggest thing.
Exactly. So, yes, I would say the rolls as well. And these both these figures, we talked about the rolls earlier, or the flams and the drags, that prep stroke,
Okay.
that can help get your hands up off the drum. But something you'll hear us do a lot is also, maybe not like that one where it plays, right? But with this, right, whenever you have, I'm pointing at a six tuplet, a fill, as we might call it, single seven, whatever you want to call it. We put almost breath before it a lot of the times, and a lot of the chords are going to put that breath so that you can get your hands up off the drum, right? So like this passage right here, you've got a lot of space to really move your hands, because all you're playing was from here. Very, very modern, and it sounded good, it's very clean. So now the next step, to play more, maybe more like we do, and this piece is perfect because it's got sevens instead of fives, right? Get those hands up off the drum. Pick those hands up, down. Even if the
Okay.
time stretches here, well, that's fine, you're playing off the drum. It doesn't have to be exact. No one's sitting with a metronome timing you, right? So that's the cool thing about this style, is you can really pick those hands up. And like, you've got a crescendo written here,
Right.
so that was a personal choice, right? So then maybe somewhere that you don't, right? Maybe here. See how it's bookended? Instead of
Yes.
thinking about this, if you want to look at it from a more traditional view, I'm pointing to a single seven again. That's got an accent on the first note and an accent on the release. Right? And the way it's written, it might look like it wants to be played da, 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 ba, right? But anytime you see that figure, whether it's in our music or fife and drum music in general, really what they're saying is, yeah, you're going to accent the first and the last note, but every note in between is also da 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 da. We call it bookended. Really, the accents are here, right? So it's all up, and that's going to help. Jump, get down. Well, that's a bad example. But this one, right? You pick it up, and picking up those hands, that's going to help with the timing, even by throwing the timing off. If that makes any sense, right? And that's going to help get those hands off the drum, and that's just going to add that next layer to dynamic contrast that I think this especially this piece, would really benefit from.
Awesome. Thank you so
Great
much.
job.
Yeah, hearing that separation between rudiments, even if you artificially put space in between, that will help the audience, or even people who you're playing with in the line hear the separation between those rudiments. So sometimes that's a good thing, putting that gap. I would not zone any of this
Okay.
on the drum. Just traditionally, they would not have done that. But if you do decide to do it, just keep in mind that the snares are not flat. Yeah, so maybe to the left.
Okay.
Just so your beads are equally distanced from the snares. Right, there were a few times I kind of heard. It may have just been because your right hand was louder than your left hand, but it could have also been the distance from the snares. I was just hearing more snare sound from your right-handed notes. Yeah, a lot of good stuff in there. Where are those sevens? Yep, and you can see written by Dom, who kind of grew up in that fife and drum tradition before he went to Hellcats. That's how he writes the sevens.
I see.
Right.
Okay.
So you can put that space in there. It's fine to play E into sevens. It's fine to play it that way. I just think that this is what Pratt meant to do.
I was gonna ask you, like, because Dr. Parks and I have been talking about like the old guard style slow seven type thing. That's what I wanted to pick your brain about. Because any recording I've heard of this, especially at like the West Point variation here, it's really open. So I was gonna ask like how you understand that, or if you just play it. Okay.
Yeah, it's like I said, I just focus on hitting that last note of the seven.
Okay.
Jump, lift my hands up a little bit. I can't remember what I truly had to think about when I first started playing those. The best thing I can recommend is just listening. It's a very unique style of music. You need to be familiar with it. Let's talk about touch a little bit, and I think that'll help with those middle notes of his fills. So, Austin can tell you. Grew up learning that with each stroke, no matter what height the stick is at, someone must perish. Right? Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
No, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So, I marched 4 years of drum corps called Teal Sound, and all the techs I had through there wanted violence in the playing. Right. So getting to the old guard, right, and being much more loose and incorporating more molar, I had to develop my touch really quickly. So something like a filler, right? My hands are actually extremely loose when I play those. Right? The tension in my hand is the same, whether I'm playing the first accent or the in-between notes or the last accent. I'm just using the weight of my arm to achieve that bookended sound. Take it down. It's loose, okay? So maybe mess around with that. Rolls too, right? We like to mess around with our rolls and develop that touch. So something we'll often do is kind of like isolate the variables. So oftentimes we'll choose. We're going to isolate the volume, but change the stick height. Right? So volume is going to stay the same. The variable is the stick height. So we'll literally play an exercise like this. Right? So that allows us to, even if we're prepping our hands up to clean the motion and enter the roll at the same time, we're still entering with a soft hand. Right? So any of these rolls, you could do that, even the fives. Phrasing those, coming in and being a little bit lighter on your touch, right? I usually end up pushing upwards, right? If you're going to talk about the mechanics of it, I push upwards on the stick with my ring finger, right? And I hold a little bit more tension in the top of my right hand, right? To bring that stick down, but not smack it, right? So I had no tension here and it was all the bottom of my arm. That's how you get a lot of velocity, right? So just having a little bit more tension here and then just pushing up with that ring finger underneath the stick. Because if it comes off, I'm just flicking the stick down. So you see when I play, very rarely will you see my hand in this position. I always have some sort of contact there, all right, so I can kind of manipulate that touch. Okay, so that's something to work on. You can do what would be the opposite? Stick height stays the same and the volume changes. That one's a little bit easier, but isolating those variables in any of your, especially double stroke rolls, will go a long way in this style. Okay. The last thing I would talk about with you is the difference between when you see like a 16th note with a drag, like a slash through it, that interpretation versus an actual 8th note with 2 grace notes attached to it, right? We like to make them sound different, right? So if you have like a PAS, or a big Firth Rudiment sheet, like a flam drag, right? It's 3 notes with a slash through the middle, super even, quantized, right? But a lot of times in our music, we would see flam, 8th rest, another 8th note with an ornament on it, and we would play that. Right, so whenever you get into these patterns with like the single drag taps, all that stuff, let there be space, right? You wrote rests in the music in an ornament, right? So instead of 15 less than 25, play. If it's written that way, right? And that just adds more nuance, more style. They'll hear the difference, especially if you're playing 5 strokes, which are that pure 30-second note, dum diggity dum diggity da da da. It adds a little bit of that swing character to it, right? So let's just start here. He's gonna play like 8 bars or so, and this is a good example because you have a bunch of running 16th notes. And when you get here,
try to add a little bit of space in between all those single drag taps, and you'll kind of see how it might add a little soul to the music.
I see. Okay.
Cool. Yeah, and then you get down here and you hear right there in that measure. You hear that difference right there automatically. And it is written different, right? Those are 16th notes with the dashes on.
I see. Okay.
Cool. Let's try that on another phrase. Rudiment cues are way more fun if you add that space. Let's try, yeah, start maybe right there on that right. Yep, and then you gotta get your hands back in that sort of 16th note pulse. Yep. Is everyone hearing the difference, right, between just right, adding that little bit of space is a little bit, definitely more interesting to my ears. Cool. We're doing good on time. Got anything else?
You explain the bass solo?
Cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice job, man. Cool. Questions? Concerns? Yes.
How long were you into this style of drumming before you won a job with it?
About 3 weeks. So I was very lucky. The adjunct professor over at University of North Florida, his name's Kevin Gary, he plays with JSO. He grew up as a young man in New Jersey playing with the Colonial Musketeers Fife and Drum Corps. Funny enough, years later we put together that he was actually competing against one of the old guard's future group leaders at the time, Brian Petney, in those New Jersey state championships. In the individual snare championships. So yeah, I was very lucky. He was very knowledgeable in the group. He's like, oh, I know what group it is. It's hilarious because I had just played glockenspiel excerpts and stuff for him up until that point, and then I had no idea he had those kind of chops. So he's like, oh, okay. Pulls out his 20-inch Cooperman drum. It's bigger than that drum, and did a roll breakdown. And I was like, I've been here for 4 years. And I did not know. I'm just monster drummer. I was like, holy crap. But I was very lucky. He definitely did a lot of coaching, helping me, especially with breaking down the rudiments before the audition. So it's always good to know somebody. And if you don't know somebody, reach out and find somebody, for any audition. I highly recommend that. But yeah, it was a very quick turnaround. It was, I didn't know I could make a living playing just snare drum. I should probably go for this. And then a month later, I was like, swearing in for recruiters. So it was a pretty quick turnaround for me. Yeah, good question. Did you have one? Did you?
So being someone that does this for a living, could you maybe talk about your left hand technique? And it's probably been a while since you thought about how to break it down, but we get into conversation about it around here often. So maybe hearing from somebody else, just how you would coach someone up.
Yeah, so like I said, we think about this a lot at the Old Guard. And we actually wrote sort of our drumline procedure. We call it the legend, right? Everything from how the visuals should look, how the music's notated, everything is kind of laid out for especially for new people when they get here. We just here's your holy grail, do this, you'll be fine. Starts from the elbows, really, and it kind of depends on, are you playing on a flat drum, are you playing, so for us, we're on a rope drum, it's slightly off center, right, it's not directly, the center of the drum is not where your belly button is, it's in here, So we start from the elbows. Your playing position should be From the elbow up, your playing position should be the exact same as when your hands are just by your side. I'm not kicking this arm out, I'm not pulling this in or anything, it's just here. Boom. That's where it should be. And then a lot of the stuff is predetermined from there. Like, okay, so there's where my elbows are. I gotta get this bead in the middle of the stick, and I gotta get it this close to the drum, you know, to the hoop. So it has to be at this angle. And what I found, both out of necessity to match the drum, but it also feels better, you know, after doing it for years, is making my left hand angle a little bit more obtuse, right? And really trying to keep this thumb in line with your two bones in your upper arm, right? Versus having an extreme angle either this way or this way. It just feels good. I don't have any wrist issues, turning, mobility issues. And I have found I have a lot more power that way, right? Because you're essentially lengthening, right? A lot of our strokes come from the elbow. So as soon as you make that more obtuse, look, I just added like 4 inches of this extension, right? From where the power is generated to the end of the implement. So I do find I have a lot more power and it's more comfortable being that way. That's the biggest thing I would say is just getting that angle sorted out, right? Depending on your hand size, I mean, these are like tree trunks of sticks, but depending on hand size, you know, just working on where you're connecting that thumb. I shoot for right in between there, where my thumb touches. When I got to the unit, I kind of had to move my bottom fingers out a little bit to help with that touch. It gave me more leverage, right? Especially when we're doing any of these stick manuals. It helped a lot with that. You know, you can see my wrist is maxed out right now. You can see the height of the stick. Those fingers make a big difference, especially when you're trying to match that angle across the line, right? And it just gives you more wrist turn, even though it has nothing to do with the wrist. My wrist is maxed out here and here. I'm not moving my wrist, it's all in the fingers, right? So that definitely helped a lot, just kind of extending those bottom fingers a little bit. And you will notice that I don't actually rest the stick on my cuticle, it's actually on that knuckle. I've actually always done that since I first started playing. But going over to Switzerland, a lot of the drummers there rest it there or even here. And they play super turned over like this. And it's just so much more control, so much more power. I wouldn't recommend that for like American drumming. The Swiss style is very defined. They have a lot of competitions, so it has been sifted through all the variations and everyone has agreed. This is how we're holding our sticks, super defined. Kind of like how all the drum and bugle boards are starting to sound the same. Okay, that's what wins, we're all gonna do that. So yeah, that's where I hold my stick. Oftentimes you'll see people do this with the pinky. All right, that's an old Les Parks thing. This was essentially done to make the hand more rigid, right? It kind of adds tension through your knuckles and makes the hand more rigid. You can accomplish that with having a relaxed pinky. It's just the way they used to teach like drummers back in the day, to like quickly lock this whole thing in place. But you don't need to do that. You can if you want. I know people who drum like that their whole life. They're in their late 60s and they have no hand issues, no nothing, but it's just different.
That's how I grew up drumming.
Yeah, the pinky pulled back. Yeah. There's a reason for it. I just think you can achieve that by not jacking up your pinky. Yeah. Good question though. Does that answer questions about left hand?
I was gonna say, also, I'm taking them to lunch, around 11:30.
Yeah, we could probably make
So
it
if
back
some of you
on
guys
that.
wanna be able to hang with us, we'll probably just go down to Bare Naked. So, and we can do some more questions then too, just cause I know you guys, some of you need to get to class, but would you guys mind playing like Crazy Army at the end and then?
Actually, to have it on film, we can play Connecticut halftime.
Oh
now for
yeah,
you
that would
guys.
be awesome.
Yeah, let's do that. We don't really have time to go through it with them, but we'll play it down if you guys want to watch the video.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you guys, this is awesome.
All right, right, so if you've seen the sheet music, you know it's pretty much a theme and variations. This is one of the first competition drum solos they would have played. It's super simple, but you can tell who's a good drummer if you listen to play this down. And if you need a warm-up routine before you start practicing, I would do this to get your hands on. All right, here we go. Connecticut halftime.